Welcome to Running in the 70s, where we interview, meet, and get to know athletes of all kind who were running in the 70s. I'm your host, Matthew Kleinowski. Today on the podcast, we're staying in Canada, talking with someone born in Europe, came and ran as a youth in Canada, ran at university in the US, came back to Canada, and has set a huge string of national records, has performed on the world stage, athlete of the year, many honors. Welcome today, Jerry Kooymans. Hi, Jerry.
Hi, Matthew. How are you doing?
Great. Did I get your name exactly right? Is it stayed with a Dutch pronunciation?
That's right. You got it exactly right. And you're one of the few who can.
All right. Let's talk about your very earliest life, where you're born, and your entry into athletics and racing.
I was born in the Netherlands. We immigrated from the Netherlands when I was 4 years old, moved to Canada in the Oakville area. I grew up in that area. And I was always pretty athletic. I tried all kinds of different activities, baseball and just a little bit of soccer, not much surprisingly. I became more involved in soccer later when my kids became involved, being Dutch bred. Of course, hockey, like all Canadians, hockey became my number one sport for quite a while, but I was okay at it, but not great. Just played house league, but I enjoyed it. But I was always a small kid, and they introduced body checking at the age of 12. At that point, being a small, skinny kid became a huge disadvantage. When I started high school, I was 5 foot nothing and 90 pounds. These guys would be towering over me, outweighing me by 50 pounds, smashing me into the boards. I decided I needed to find another sport where being small and skinny was an advantage. At that time, I was halfway through grade 10, and a friend of mine said, Jerry, you should join this miles club. You log your miles, and after you run 500 miles, they give you a crest. So I thought, oh, that's cool. I think I can do that. I think I can run 500 miles. It was February of my grade 10 year, and we didn't have an indoor track. So we're running up on the third floor of the school, banging into lockers, trying to make these 90-degree turns around the corner. I just suffered an eye injury in my last hockey game. I took a stick to the face, and I was cut for stitches just below the eye and had a nice black eye. So I'm out there for my first running practice, and the coach said, don't worry, Jerry, we'll train you so you can outrun that guy next time. After a month of just logging miles on the third floor, the coach said, we're going out to High Park in Toronto to run a road race. Do you want to join in? And I thought, I don't know about that. I don't really want to race. I just want to run my 500 miles and collect my crest. I said, okay, let's go. I went out and I ran the race, and I did surprisingly well. I was the top guy from our high school in the race. And I decided, oh, I've improved a lot in just 1 month of running. I think this is something I could be good at. The harder you work, the more you get out of it. Let's give it a shot, and let's see if I can run a few more races. Before I knew it, I was running that spring in the outdoor track meets. Then some of my other teammates were saying, oh, you've got a future here. Why don't you join a track club this summer? You got to keep it going. You don't just stop running when school's out. So I joined a track club that summer and just kept on going from there. I've been running ever since. So that was 1971, more than 53 years ago.
Let me ask you then, 1971, what shoes were you wearing? What was the training besides logging miles? Did you have any plan? And when did that change?
The shoes, basic Adidas running shoes like Adidas Dragon, I think was one of the shoes I wore back then. After that first road race, I got into racing fairly quickly and ran track races that spring. I went out and got my first pair of spikes, Puma Tampico spikes, I believe they were. Had moderate success on the track as well. And I joined a track club that summer in Burlington, Ontario. People said if you wanted to do well in this sport, you should belong to a track club. So I did that. I just really got into the sport. I looked for books in the library. The Jim Ryan story was one of the first books I read, and that motivated me. I immediately subscribed to Track and Field News and read every issue cover to cover. So I really became a fan of the sport at the same time as being a competitor in the sport.
Canada is more like the UK and New Zealand and Australia, Commonwealth countries in which sports at that age are not school based, they're club based. And that sounds like your story too. Get into a club. What about the coaching? Who was your first coach?
My first coach was Tom McLaughlin. He was an English teacher. I never actually had him as a teacher, but he was my coach throughout high school. Didn't really know a lot about track and field, but he knew about motivating kids and motivating athletes to do their best. He got me out. That miles club I thought was a stroke of genius to get people out, and whether people were logging miles to lose weight or just to get that crest, I got people out. And then from that base, he managed to get a few people who were interested in competing in track and cross country. Once I decided, okay, this is a good sport for me, and I started reading track and field news, I started designing my own workouts. Before long, we would come out for a workout and Coach Tom would ask me, okay, Jerry, what are we doing today? So, okay, 2,400s in 70 seconds with a 200-meter jog. That's our workout.
What was your distance of those days in school? You were running both track and cross country.
Track, I was doing the 1,500 and the 3,000, and I picked up on the steeplechase pretty quickly. I decided that was a good event for me. Even back in the early days, in my very first track meets, I didn't have much of a kick, so I was more of a strength runner, and I found the steeplechase was very good for that comment.
Jerry, what was your initial success that made you think this was something you were going to do past school? Before you got to university, when did you think, oh, this is something I'm going to keep doing?
Even after that first race, a month after I started running for the miles club, I had a reasonable amount of success in that race, and I thought, okay, I think this is something I can be good at. It was clear to me right from the outset that track is a sport, especially distance running, is a sport that you get in what you get out of it, what you put into it. So the harder you work, the better you got. And I could see the improvement already in such a short time, and I thought, okay, this is something I can give it a shot, and I got success fairly quickly. I was winning county meets. By the time I was in grade 12, I qualified for OFSA, the Ontario High School Championship. So it took me a couple of years to get up to that level, but then I did well at that level. Grade 12, I finished sixth in the steeplechase and sixth in the 3,000 meters. In Ontario, you go to grade 13. So I had one more year after that. Then I won the OFSA steeplechase in grade 13 with a new Canadian high school record. And I finished third in the 3,000. I finished third in the OFSA cross country meet the previous fall. I was having really good success by the time I graduated from high school. So I started to look down to the US to see if I could continue running at a competitive level at the NCAA level.
In Canada, it's provinces, but it's equivalent to the largest province in Canada and the state champion. So you were a state champion effectively. And how were you as a student? How'd that contribute to where you could look to go to school in the US?
I was always a strong student. I was number one in my class in grade 13. I had a 93% average. So I was looking to the States. I wrote the SATs, and I don't remember exactly my scores, but I had pretty strong SAT scores. I started to think, okay, do I want to go on an athletic scholarship and really be under the control of the track coach and then come back to Canada, possibly with a degree that may not be recognized by all Canadian employers? Or do I want to go to an internationally renowned school like an Ivy League school? So I immediately decided I really wanted to go to an Ivy League school. My phys ed teacher in high school actually knew Larry Ellis, the Princeton track coach at the time, and he suggested I contact Larry, which I did. And then I also applied to Yale. So I got into Princeton and Yale, just made almost an arbitrary decision, but it did seem like Princeton's track program was a little better at the time. I did not visit the campus, so I had no idea what I was getting into. And of course, there was no internet back then. So it was just basically material that they sent to me, and I made my decision. So the first time I actually saw the Princeton campus was in September, just the freshman week before the classes started. And I realized then that I made a good decision.
Nice. What did they offer you? Were you on scholarship?
I was on a partial scholarship. Ivy League schools don't give athletic scholarships. It's all based on financial need. So based on my family's financial situation, they paid for about half of my expenses, tuition, room and board, and all that stuff. That made it affordable, and I financed the rest. They gave me a part-time job on campus, and I took out student loans. So I managed to get through on my own that way.
How was the transition to training at that level?
It was a bit of a challenge at first. I think I was running about 70 miles a week by the time I graduated high school. That summer, I had to have a summer job to help pay my expenses. So I was working 10 hours a day on the assembly line at Ford in Oakville. And Larry Ellis sent a letter to all the new recruits, and he said, I want you running 100 miles a week during the summer to get ready for a cross-country season. He recommended twice a day workouts, which I had never done before. Working 10 hours a day standing on your feet, you don't really want to do double workouts. So I did the math, and I did a 15-mile run every day after work to get my 100 miles. So that was a big change. And then I got to Princeton, and the first week I was there, we ran 130 miles. Yeah, it was a big jump up in distance. I got used to it fairly quickly and settled in at about 100 miles a week, double workouts through my whole 4 years at Princeton. Yeah, and I did right from the outset. I broke the Princeton freshman cross country record in my second race there. So I had success almost immediately with the new training program.
Who were your competitors? Who did Princeton compete against then, and mostly at those early meets?
It was the Ivy League schools. Had a lot of dual meets, but non-Ivy League schools just down the road in New Jersey. Rutgers was one of our prime challengers. And they had a few good guys then. You might remember Mike Roach. He was a year or two ahead of me. We raced each other quite a few times, especially in the steeplechase as well as cross country. Of course, Harvard, Yale, all the other Ivy League schools. Navy and Army were then part of the heptagonal championships along with the Ivy League schools. So there were a few good guys there. Kurt Litz, Dennis Trujillo were two of the top guys there. And then other schools like Fairleigh Dickinson, Manhattan, Seton Hall, just generally schools close by in the area.
What transpired over the 4 years in terms of your goal setting? Were you focusing with your coach? Were you looking at times? Were you looking at success, results, rankings? And
Probably all of the above. I was time oriented when I got there. By then, the steeplechase was my specialty, having won the Ontario Championships. And that was something fairly new for the program. The steeplechase record was pretty weak. It was 9:20 when I got there. So I quickly brought that down to 9:01 in my freshman year. So time oriented there, trying to break some school records, trying to run fast times. But there was also something unique in terms of the team approach, because we had all these dual meets where there was a team winner in every meet. And then you get to the heptagonal championships, the Ivy League championships. And boy, that was a real team-oriented type of setup there, especially in track. Cross country, you're competing with the guys you train with every day. But then you get into track and field, and you've got guys on your teams hulking hammer throwers and shot putters and discus throwers, pole vaulters and all the jumpers, as well as the sprinters and the distance runners. We all became one big family cheering each other on. And that was something I wasn't used to, going to a track meet and everybody cheering you on, and then you cheering on your teammates, and then being aware of what the point score was after each event and coming down to the end of the meet and trying to pull out a win in the big championship meet. So that was something interesting.
what was your relationship with your coach like?
Funny you asked that. It was pretty good most of the time. We had a pretty good relationship. His workouts were working with me, and I was producing decent results, although I did have a few bumps in the road with injuries and all that. But we had a bit of a falling out in my senior year. I had come back from 5 weeks of training at altitude in Boulder, Colorado, so I was in really good shape. By that point, I wanted to do well at the NCAA level. I had been to the NCAA once before in cross country, so I wanted to do well there. And just I ran a poor tactical race in the IC4A, which was the regional qualification race at the time at Van Cortlandt Park. Just ran a poor tactical race. That first mile is flat and fast, and I couldn't run the first mile in 4:20 to establish a good position in the cow paths for the next couple of miles. So I ended up missing the NCAA by one place individually, and our team had a bad race because our team had been qualifying as a team for the last few years, and they didn't qualify as a team. So I didn't get to go to the NCAA my senior year, and there I was in great shape. I'd done all this altitude training, 100 miles a week up at altitude, great shape. And then my roommate, Merrill Noden, said to me, I'm going to go to Asbury Park, New Jersey next week to run a marathon. Do you want to come? And I had already had some preliminary discussions with Larry Ellis in prior years and said, I'd like to try a marathon sometime. And Larry said, no, you're way too young. Don't even think about running a marathon while you're in university. You're too young. So I didn't bother asking for permission. I thought, okay, yeah, let's give it a shot. I hadn't trained for the marathon other than just doing regular cross-country training. I went out for a 20-mile run a week before the marathon just to see how it felt. And I thought, yeah, okay, I think I can run 26 miles. Then I went into the race and finished third in 2:19. Then went back to campus, and Larry calls me that evening and he says, I'd like you to come out tomorrow for an indoor track workout. This is the first week of December now. So cross country's been over and we're getting ready for indoor track season. So I'd like you to come out and do some repeat 800s to get ready for our first dual meet. I said, I don't think that's a good idea. And he said, well, why not? I said, I just ran a marathon this morning. So that was the end of our good relationship. He was really pissed off, and he was just reaming me out for 5 minutes. I thought we had good trust and all that stuff. I thought I told you shouldn't be running marathons at this age. And then about 5 minutes into the conversation, he said, well, how did you do? And I said, not bad. I ran 2:19. He goes, oh, that's pretty good.
But a jaw drop moment there.
Yeah. We lost a little bit of trust in our relationship then, but I think we patched it up okay. We were okay for the rest of the season.
Up through now, from this club in Canada through the very team-oriented approach of Princeton, how competitive were you as a person, and how'd that feed into your training, how you ran it at practices and in meets?
Yeah, I'm pretty competitive as a person. When I get to the starting line, I always want to give 100%. None of this jogging along behind someone and just trying to blow them away in the last 100 meters. Prefontaine was my role model. If someone's going to beat me, I'm going to make them hurt. So very competitive, always trying to make everybody run as hard as they can if they're going to beat me. Sometimes that might have translated in workouts as well. I've been with Toronto Olympic Club since 1983. I was with a few different clubs before that, but I pretty well settled as Toronto Olympic Club is the best club for me, and I've been there ever since. I'm still with that club now. We got pretty competitive in our workouts. So there were a bunch of good guys there, Olympians or people who are training for the Olympics. And we had some pretty fit guys, and we got pretty competitive in some of our workouts. And there was one workout where it was the figure 8 workout, just running a figure 8 around High Park and doing 2 laps, which was about 19 kilometers total, I think. And people were keeping track of their times and course records and all that. And it's just a workout, right? And theoretically, when you're doing a 19-kilometer run, you're supposed to start off, warm up a little, ease into it, but right out of the gate, pretty well the first kilometer, you're already running almost race pace for a 19-kilometer race, that type of thing. And then sometimes, if one guy, like Rob Earl's a good example, but he finished second in the World Cross Country Junior race one year. And he and I were training hard in the early 80s, trying to, make the Olympic team. If he couldn't make one of the workouts, then he'd show up late and he'd be in the dressing room. Okay, what time today? And then, okay, I'm going to go out and try to beat it now. So we had a good, healthy, competitive atmosphere in that club.
Tell me about the injuries you did have. Did you have any injuries before you got to Princeton, and what happened during that 4 years?
I probably had a few minor injuries in high school. I don't really recall anything major. Princeton had a few more serious injuries, sprained my ankle a few times. They weren't too bad because you might miss a race or two. You'd have the therapist there right on campus wrapping your ankle up for races and things like that. So that wasn't too bad. The worst injury I had was sciatica, which pretty well wiped out most of my sophomore year. I'd be going off to a chiropractor in New York on a regular basis, trying to get some treatment for that. And eventually I got over that. Yeah, a few injuries that slowed down my progress at Princeton, but the real major injuries started happening after I graduated from Princeton and after I went on to get my MBA for 2 years as well. I started working full time in 1981. And that's when the injuries started. So I've had 5 surgeries since then. 1980 was my first surgery. I was actually between first and second year in the MBA program. I took a year off to train full time, trying to make the 1980 Olympic team. Then, of course, we boycotted. But then I also got injured, and then eventually I had to have surgery on that. It was an ankle injury. So I've had 5 surgeries starting in 1980. The last one was 2016.
Do you think the sciatica was a training injury? Was it a trauma? Because you did do the high mileage. A lot of people were doing it, but most of your injuries sound like ankles. They were stuff that happened on a course somewhere. What do you know what caused the sciatica?
I don't really know. It's probably just a biomechanical issue. That's all I can think of. There's nothing I was doing unusual. It might have been the mileage, but when you do mileage and you've got even a slight biomechanical issue, it could eventually lead to an injury.
I wanted to ask you about the era then, in terms of being Canadian. Who were the people that were on your radar as role models or people you followed? You're reading the U.S. publications, of course, Track and Field News. You mentioned Prefontaine, all that going on. Also, what events were you aiming for originally for the 80 Olympics?
I had made the transition to the marathon at that point. As I mentioned, I was a steeplechaser through high school. That was my specialty at Princeton. My last competitive steeplechase was the summer after I graduated from Princeton in 1978, because I had already run that first marathon in my senior year. And I decided, okay, I think that's where my strength is. I think I'm a good road runner. I think I can do well over the longer distances because, like I said before, I don't have much of a kick. I don't have a lot of speed. So I decided then to focus on the marathon. I ran 2:19:28 in Asbury Park at the Jersey Shore Marathon. My second marathon was in Toronto. I ran 2:19:00.2, and a modest improvement, but again, another solid race, a good race. I did well there. And then I ran into the first serious injury problem, the ankle injury, which required surgery. But I was hoping to make the Olympics in 1980 in the marathon. After that surgery, I got back into training. I ran some good road races, 29:10 for 10K on the roads. I ran some good 20K races. Back then, 20K was more popular than half marathon. I ran a couple of races exactly the same time, 61:52, including a Canadian championship. I thought, okay, I'm running well at the 10K, 20K distance, 10 mile. I ran 48 minutes and beat some good people there. So I was having pretty good success in the 10K to 20K. I stepped back down to 80 miles a week at that point. I found that, first of all, holding a full-time job, and then the results of having surgery on my ankle, once I got above 80 miles a week, I started to break down. So I kept it at 80 miles a week, single workouts. I decided double workouts doesn't work when you're working full time. And I thought, I wonder if I can still run a decent marathon on this kind of training. So I ran one more in 1981. It was, again, in Toronto Marathon. Kevin Ryan from New Zealand was the favorite. And I stuck with him for the first half of the race. And we went out in 1:06:30. I was feeling great. And 35K, I was still doing well. And then all of a sudden, I just hit the wall. I went from running a good race and hoping for a 2:15 or 2:16 anyways, if not faster. I went from that to suddenly stopping. I decided I couldn't even finish the race. So I stopped and walked for a couple of minutes after 35K. Only a couple of people passed me in that whole time, and there was still a little bit of prize money there. So I thought, okay, I'll jog it in and collect my prize money and call it a day, which I did. I ran 2:22. That was my last marathon, 1981. So I decided, okay, let's go back down to the 10K now. I seem to be more comfortable at 10K, 10 miles, even 20K. but nothing longer than that. So I'd run the Olympic trial steeplechase in 76. In 1980, I thought I was a marathon runner. 1984, my focus was on the 10,000 meters on the track. And so that's what I was working towards in those years leading up to 1984.
What was the state of things there in the early 80s? Prize money was out while you were running there at the elite level. What was the operation of Canadian Olympic Committee and support for people like you? Working, not full-time athletes, but pursuing the
Yeah,
trial.
it wasn't great. They had a carding system. There was a national carding system. I managed to get onto the Ontario provincial carding, which was peanuts, really, just a few $100s a month. It wasn't even cash. It was basically expense reimbursements. You had to submit expenses, and the whole amateur thing, it was trust fund and that type of thing. So I would just basically get my vitamins paid for and that kind of stuff, and maybe a little bit of travel. So it wasn't great. I always look back on that time and I think, I wonder if I could have had more success if I just had a little bit more support and maybe didn't have to work full time, or even if I had better medical support. Because although we get medical, most of our medical paid for in Ontario and Canada, once you get into physiotherapy and massage therapy, you're on your own once again. Even though I was working for a big bank and had a medical plan, you burn through your annual entitlement for physiotherapy within 5 or 6 weeks, especially if you're coming back from surgery and you needed physio. Within 5 or 6 weeks, you burn through your annual allotment, and then you're on your own again. It would have been nice to have a little bit more support to see if I could have gotten up to that next level.
When did the pursuit of that end, that you quit pursuing open national Olympic team?
I kept competing at the national level all through the 80s. 88, I was injured again, so I didn't really have a good shot at the 88 Olympics. And several times I came close to making the World Cross Country Championships. I would miss by 1 or 2 spots, even back in my Princeton days. One time I qualified for the NCAA cross country. I also wanted to go to the Canadian Championships because I thought I had a good chance of making the Canadian team. So Larry Ellis let me go. It was Canadian Championships on Saturday in Halifax and the NCAA in Denton, Texas on Monday. That was my double. Once again, I just missed the Canadian team by 1 or 2 spots, and then flew to Denton and ran a decent race, but obviously not the best race I could have run. Henry Rono beat me that year, along with about 150 other people. So I had been close even back in those days, in my university days, and a couple of other times I came close to making the team. So in 1989, I went all out. I went on special diet, eat to win diet, and made sure I cut out alcohol, caffeine, all kinds of stuff. Made sure I ate properly and trained hard. Went to Halifax for the Canadian Cross Country Championships. I was the 8th Canadian in the race, and they were taking 9. But I think they said that they were automatically taking the top 7 in the last 2 spots. They would accept people applying who didn't run in the race. Peter Butler and Paul Williams were the 2 top Canadians at that time, track runners, Canadian record holders in the 10,000, that type of thing. They didn't run in this race. Paul Williams had sent a letter asking if he could make the team, if they would consider putting him on the team. And so I was in limbo for a while. I finished the race. I was happy with my race, but I didn't know for sure if I was going to be on the team. Then we went to the reception in the evening. But before we went there, one of my teammates, Gary Westgate from Toronto Olympic Club, he had finished ahead of me, and he's about 8 years younger than I am, but he had already been to the World Cross Country Championships. I was 34 years old when I ran this race. I knew this was my last chance. Gary, 8 years younger, had already represented Canada on the world stage. And he said, if they don't name you to the team, I'm giving up my spot and you can take my spots.
Wow.
That was a really special moment for me. And then that night at the banquet, they announced, okay, all 9 guys, top 9 guys in this race, you're on the team. We've received letters, but we're not taking anybody who didn't run the race. So I was finally on my first Canadian team at the age of 34. So I got to run in the 1990 World Cross Country Championships in actually Van France.
How much time ahead did you go over there travel? How much time did you take off from regular part of life then to be part of that?
I think it was at least a week. We had a fair bit of time to get used to the environment and to just get ready for the race. And I took my wife with me. My coach, Paul Post, went with me and his wife. And then, of course, Gary Westgate, my teammate as well. It was nice hanging out together with these guys and experiencing the whole thing. Yeah, it was quite an experience.
When did you connect with your coach, Paul? When did you first connect with him?
I was certainly aware of him in the 70s when I was still in high school. All the big guns in distance running were with Toronto Olympic Club in the 70s. Grant McLaren, Dan Shaughnessy, Jerome Drayton, Joe Sachs, the Craig brothers, all the Canadian records from the 1500 up to the marathon were held by Toronto Olympic Club athletes. Even though I was in different clubs at the time, I was certainly aware of the club and aware of Paul Post, who started the club even before I was born. He started the club in 1954. Eventually, I decided, okay, enough banging my head against the wall trying to beat these guys. They obviously have a good program. Finally, in 19, I joined the club. He became my coach, and he was my coach until he died last year at the age of 94.
Some of the things you've talked about is your self-assessed lack of speed and kick, but your ongoing master's career has spanned events back down to the 800 all the way up to the half marathon. You've set a lot of national records. You've won a lot of national championships, athlete of the year. What was your outlook there when you left the world elite level open to masters? Were you aware of the masters ongoing program, and when did you dive into competing in that?
I was only vaguely aware of the master's program when I was still in my 20s and 30s. To me, that wasn't something I was aspiring to. I thought, okay, let's try to make this Canadian team. And then I finally did it at age 34. And then I said, okay, time to get on with life. Shortly after that, I actually started my own business. I had been with the big bank, CIBC, for almost 10 years. At that point, I decided, let's try something on my own, started my own business. So that was my focus for a couple of years, did very little training or racing. That didn't work out well. So I went back to the bank to have a solid paycheck. I just kept up enough running. So I still ran races, but the times were much slower now. And I wasn't very competitive at the elite level anymore. And by the time I was in my mid to late 30s, then I turned 40 and I had another guy in the club who was a couple of years ahead of me, and he had been going down to the States. I was in my late 30s. I would still go down to the US to run some of the road races, and I'd get my clock cleaned every time I went down there. And my friend who had just turned 40 be coming back with $1,000 checks for winning the Masters division. And I go, oh, okay, there's life after 40 here. Yeah, I did the same thing after I turned 40. I think I was injured the first year, but then I got healthy and pretty fit again. And, I was running sub 15 for 5K road races, just over 30 minutes for 10K, which was pretty competitive as a Masters runner. So I would go down to the US and run in the races and pick up a few checks. And I thought, okay, this is fun, running against people your own age and doing well. And then I started to run more of the shorter distances too, because the 1500 was an afterthought, or speed work, especially once I got to university. Larry Ellis would let me run one mile race per year just for speed work, but that was it. We had a bunch of guys like Craig Masbach who were knocking on the door 4-minute miles, and they didn't need me. They kept me at the longer distances. But then when I became a master, I found that there were all these masters 1 mile races, indoor track, especially in the Rochester area and the Buffalo area and Syracuse. So just a short drive from Toronto. There was a whole new community. I met all these masters milers who became friends and competitors, and I'll be running the 428 mile and winning prize money for that. And I thought, geez, I never thought of myself as a miler before. Yeah, it became fun again because the mile is fun. It doesn't hurt that much. It's over so quickly.
Yeah, that is one thing Jackie Hansen mentioned. She was a world record holder in the marathon, and she won the world championship in the 1500 and 5000. She said she was laughing going around the last lap saying, I'm not hurting yet.
Yeah.
This is too short for me to even get into the pain
Yeah.
zone. Okay, how did your racing style change? You had been a strength runner, and the speed, a 428 mile at that age, is still takes some leg speed. And you seem to have retained maybe a greater percentage of your leg speed than some of us that got older that may have been faster earlier. How did your racing strategy and tactics evolve? Did they change once you became masters?
I don't think so. I think, like you hinted at, I just slowed down more slowly than other runners, so I became more successful. But my tactics were really just the same: get out front, make people hurt, especially in the late stages of a race. Crank it up, but don't wait till the last 200 because I'll just get out kicked. That's carried all the way through. I went to the World Championships in 2005 and won a couple of bronze medals at the age of 50. And I was leading up until the last 200, and these two guys would outkick.
Ah,
Same old story, same type of tactics, basically.
you have set a lot of records, many of them. By the time you were in the Masters Hall of Fame in 2012, I think you still had 15 existing records that hadn't been beaten yet. Do you remember the first record that you set at the Canadian National Masters level, and how quickly they came after that, and how you approached goal setting for that?
You know what? I don't remember which one was the first, but it was age 45. So when I was in the 45 to 49 category, that's when I set my first Masters records, and I broke four of them that year. So there was the mile, the 3,000, the 5,000, and like there might have been, I think it was all outdoor track. There were no road races or indoor track at the time. I have to pull out my huge spreadsheet to confirm that. Anyways, the mile, for example, it's hard to find outdoor mile races these days, and it's even harder to find road mile races. So sometimes I'm chasing records by trying to set something up. In this case, Peter Pym, a local coach in Toronto, I worked with him. He said, I'm going to put on a festival of mile races, outdoor mile races. I said, oh, great. I'm looking for a mile because I think I can run faster than the outdoor 1 mile record. And so we set that one up basically as a record attempt for me. And he had pacers for me and all that. The 3,000 was another memorable one because I was just really getting into great shape late in the summer. The track season's pretty short up here. And I was trying to find a 3,000 meter race because I thought, okay, I think the record was something like 8:54. And I thought, okay, I think I can get that record. But I couldn't find a 3,000 meter race. The season was winding down. I found one near Sarnia, Ontario, which was a 4-hour drive from where I was in Toronto. I thought, okay, I'm going to go out and run this race. I had my splits all figured out. I had it written down in my hand. I drove for 4 hours. I got to the track. I saw a friend of mine, Dave Mills, who was on my cross country team at Western when I was getting my MBA there. Dave said, oh, what are you doing here? And I said, I'm trying to break a Canadian record. And he goes, I'm coaching a couple of high school athletes. I said, what kind of time are they running? Like 9:15 or something. I said, oh, geez, I think I'm on my own. I thought, okay, I've got to break this record. Otherwise, it's 4-hour drive and then a 4-hour drive back. Miss the record. I'm standing on the starting line, and these kids are lined up beside me. And by now, Dave had told them what I was doing. Went in and shook my hand and said, good luck, sir. I went out, and right from the gun, I led, and I lapped almost everybody in the field. I keep looking at my hand every lap to see if I'm still on pace, and I was exactly on pace. And I ended up breaking it by 1/10 of a second.
Wow, that's great.
I broke the record by 1/10 of a second. I thought, oh, thank goodness, it's going to be a happy drive, 4-hour drive back home now.
You and I were on the track together at one point. I did get back into masters just for a short time before COVID. It was the what used to be called the NCNACCA. I ran the steeplechase. I'd run in the Ontario steeplechase, so I ran that race too. I wasn't really a steeplechaser, and I wasn't really in shape, but it was a good meet. It was a pretty hot day, though. That was held at the University of Toronto
Yeah,
track.
yeah.
You won the 5K there? Was that?
Yeah, I won the 5,000. I was 64 years old, so that was the M60 category then, 60 to 64. Yeah.
You have the best luck in that category because you're at the top, because we get to be reborn every 5 years. When were you hitting the highest rankings on the scale? Which age group were you the most elite at in these
Yeah,
masters?
I would say definitely 50 to 54 M50 category. I broke 13 Canadian records in that category, and that's when I won my 2 bronze medals at the World Masters Championships. Just using the age grading calculator, the quality of the races, the age grading percentages were pretty high for those races. That's definitely my peak. Ever since then, I've had more and more injuries, and the last 2 age categories, I've only broken 1 record in each category because I've basically been injured for 4 out of the 5 years, both times.
Wow. Yeah. A lot of people never get to break a record, but how have you adjusted to that psychologically? Being competitive, having been a team guy, but facing the realities of aging and injuries, how do you deal with that when you are not able to compete? What does that feel like psychologically to you?
It does bother me. I try to stay active. I try to do other things to compensate because I don't like to get out of shape. I like to get on a bike and go cycling or kayaking, snowshoeing, cross country skiing. Just try to stay active and just hope that eventually I'll overcome the injuries and get back into it. Somehow I've managed to do it all the time. I'm injured again right now. I don't know if I'll ever race again or break any records again, but just in January, I broke another record. That was after almost 4 years of injuries, wondering if that was the end of my running career. Then I managed to put together a solid 6-month block of training and got another record. It's so rewarding when that happens because you think, oh, is this it? Do I have to now change my entire lifestyle? I've been running for 53 years. Do I have to make a pretty drastic change to my lifestyle by not running anymore? I always seem to bounce back, and hopefully I can do it again.
Well, you've received a lot of honors. Are any of them more things you reflect on and are more consider close to your, or a more emotionally powerful, from Athlete of the Year, from Hall of Fame? What do you think about those kind of honors?
I think they're great because they recognize success over a longer period of time. It's great when you run a really good race and maybe you break a record or you win a medal, but to be recognized over a longer period of time, whether it's Athlete of the Year or Hall of Fame, then your body of work basically is recognized. So you realize I'm not just a flash in the pan. I didn't just have a lucky day or a good day. I've managed to maintain it over a long period of time.
And at quite a span of distances. You have set records from 800. Have you set a half marathon?
Yeah, these were all when I was 50, right? That's when I
Yeah.
broke 13 records. The 800 is a funny one because, like I said to you already, the mile or the 1500 was a short race for me, and I rarely ran that once I got out of high school. 800, even more so. I ran it a couple of times in high school, didn't run it at all in university. I think I ran one in 1987 just to see where I stood, and I ran a 157 then. So I finally broke 2 minutes officially. Fast forward to I'm 50 years old in 2006 now, indoor season. I'm looking at the Canadian records and I go, oh, 211. I can do that. So, with no training for the 800, I just jumped into an 800-meter race and ran 209. And boy, you think a 1500 is short and you don't have time to hurt. That thing was over so quickly before I could blink an eye. The race is over and I ran 209 and go, that's the 800. I'm done with that now.
Yeah, put that on the shelf. How has the support of the Canadian Masters Association? It's a great community. Certainly the Masters community locally and then nationally and worldwide is such a great, welcoming, supporting community. But as an elite athlete in that, a lot of the people are competing who are not elite anymore, or maybe who never were, or just there to show up and keep doing it. How has that community supported you?
Oh, it's just been a great camaraderie among all the athletes. You go to these meets, and especially after COVID, you're so isolated for years and you haven't seen a lot of these people And that first meet after COVID, when you go back and you see all your old friends again, it really is a wonderful community. So many of my friends are track athletes, whether they were friends from my elite years or new friends I've made in the masters community. It's just wonderful to stay in touch with these people. You share a passion for running. But yeah, it's great to go to meets and see these people, especially now. I'm up here out in the country running on my own. So it's nice to get together for competitions and see your fellow athletes at these competitions.
Yeah, I think the first race I went to, I don't know if it was a open meet. I just said, "Oh, I'm gonna show up and run all kind of events." So I entered even the 100 meters, and I said, "I don't know how to use blocks." So the 10 minutes before the race, I had all the guys coming over. So we're going to teach you in the next 10 minutes how to use these things. That's it. I finished last, but I ran an 800 that meet and did well. I won the race, and the whole community, it was no different where I was going to finish last or win a heat. Just a great experience. You having been in the sport competing for over 50 years, there's been lots of changes, of course. You came through the time when money started. You came through when nutrition was a big factor in your personal preparation. Now there's doping. Now there's super shoes. There's competitive rules. There was just an article today where someone in the under 20 in the US got disqualified later for length of the spikes. Shoes were okay for NCAA, but not for World Athletics, and they disqualified. What about all the changes in the sport over those years? Have there been transition periods where things were quantum changes that you saw?
I guess it would be the shoes for one. Geez, even when I started at Princeton, and I'm looking at your background there, the Nike
Yeah.
Oregon Waffles. My freshman year, the trainer hands out Nike Oregon Waffles to the whole cross country team. We were just going, wow, look at these shoes. These are designed for cross country. And we thought they were the greatest thing. And even when I was running steeplechase, I was sponsored by Adidas at first, and they came out with a steeplechase shoe with little holes around the edge where the water would drain out. So I'd wear these in my steeplechase. And I thought, this is cool. All these specialty shoes for this type of thing. Then I guess the shoes pretty well stayed pretty constant for quite a few decades until you had this minimalist movement for a while where all of a sudden the less padding you had in your shoes was supposed to be better. I even tried those for all, but by then I'm already an old guy, right? And I probably should have realized I need some support. But now, of course, we've gone the complete opposite direction. 40 millimeters stacked and the carbon plates and everything. Still being a competitive runner, I go out and get these carbon plated shoes, and yeah, they do make a huge difference. But you got to get the right pair, as I found out painfully. Last year, I had carbon plated road racing shoes for a while, and I could tell that they made a difference. But then I thought, okay, I need to get carbon plated spikes. Last year, I ran 1933 indoors for 5,000 meters. The Canadian record was a soft record. It was 1919. And I thought, geez, if I had carbon plated shoes, I probably would have got that record. So I went and got a pair of carbon plated shoes, but turned out I got the wrong ones. I did my research online. I got the Nike Zoom Victory. According to the online claims by Nike, this is good for middle distance runners from 1,500 up to 5,000. I thought, okay, that's my range. Let's get these shoes. And I went and ran a race. And yeah, I ran a 3,000. And I chopped 30 seconds off my time from a couple of weeks before for 3,000 meters. And I thought, wow, these shoes are great. But then my Achilles tendon started to feel a little achy. Then, like an idiot, 5 days later, I did a hard interval workout indoors with these spikes, and I was limping afterwards. I had destroyed my Achilles tendon, and I was out for 6 months. Then right after that, of course, all the other Masters runners were going, "Oh, you were wearing Nike Zoom Victory spikes? Those are for sprinters or for like 800-meter runners. You want the Dragonfly. It's not as hard on the Achilles." So I went out and got a pair of those and put them on the shelf while I was sitting out 6 months with an injury. And then finally got healthy in the fall again. Then sure enough, I ran in them in January and ran 1847. So from 1933, the year before, with old technology spikes to 1847 with carbon plated spikes that didn't destroy my Achilles. And
Wow.
yeah, huge difference.
You're still active. Are you still a fan? When we publish this, it'll be a little bit past the U.S. Olympic trials. Are you a TV and detail follower fan still of
Yes,
running?
I definitely am. It's a lot easier to follow these days. You set the PVR for all the meets so you can watch them at your leisure. And if you missed a race on TV, you go online and go to YouTube. You can see all these races. Yeah, it's a lot easier to follow, and I definitely still follow, and I'm still amazed by all the performances. In the old days, I would set the VCR with the videotape to record the meet, or else I would have to make sure I was there and nothing else was interfering with my attention to the race. It gets tough with the Olympics because, of course, it's all these different sports, and so you're trying to find out, okay, when's the track stuff coming on? But yeah, I definitely still follow, and I get excited for world championships and Olympics and the Diamond League meets and things like that.
You've heard about Michael Johnson's new league to launch next year.
Yeah.
Do you see anybody while you're watching these meets this year that runs your way? Is there anybody who's successful without the finishing kick these days and the distances that you ran?
On a whole different level, there's Ingebrigtsen, right? He can't wait till the last 100 or 200 meters usually because you get a guy like Josh Kerr who can outkick him. That's a whole different level, obviously. He's still running really fast the last 400 meters, but he knows he's got to crank it up earlier rather than wait till the very end.
That's an interesting thing that, say, perhaps people that haven't competed or haven't competed at his particular distances are not quite as aware. The announcing on track and field can vary in quality from knowledgeable announcers giving some insights into that stuff and not. So yeah, occasionally we'll have discussions with people who are more casual fans of the sport that aren't as keyed into that. What's your outlook now? How do you feel about what you'll hope to happen for competing? Do you have any goals left? You've had such a great career. I'm sure everything you get now will be just more joy of staying in the community and racing. Do you have any horizon that you look for, that you want to do anything else in the sport?
There's probably nothing else really other than getting healthy again and being able to enjoy the sport, being able to enjoy the workouts. That's the most important thing because you spend most of your time training. If you head out the door and everything's hurting and it's agony, then it's not a lot of fun. I don't know how much longer I can keep that up. But if there's always a hope that I'll get fit again and race again, then certainly just the next age category, I'll take a look at the Canadian records there, see if there's any that are achievable. They also get a lot harder. They got a lot harder once I turned 60 because that's when Ed Whitlock was at his peak in terms of being a world record holder and world champion in the Masters age group competitions, and his records are really tough. You have to pick and choose which ones are still attainable. But even if I don't get any more records, that's fine. I'm happy with what I've accomplished so far. I just hope I can still continue to run without pain and without injury, just getting healthy again and being able to go out and run. Because I do enjoy the training process, whether I'm just going out for an easy distance run or hammering out some intervals. Enjoy the training process, but obviously it's not fun if you're hurting and injured.
We all hope so too. That goes well for you. Just to mention, Canada has had some spectacular Masters athletes, female Carla DeGrance in the shorter distances, Ed Whitlock. There are many impressive national records and performances on the world level from Canada with Masters athletes. Did you meet these guys whose records you broke?
I haven't really broken any Ed Whitlock Canadian records. I broke one of his Ontario records, but obviously that was the gold standard looking at the times he was running. I met Ed quite a few times, talked to him quite a few times. A really nice guy. Earl Fee's another guy. We look up to him. He's had huge success on the international scene. I've met him several times as well. A lot of the other records, it's a lot of different people. I've met some of them, but a lot of them I never did meet. My last two records were Rob Jackson records, so I definitely met him and we're good friends. And we keep teasing each other as well. Sometimes he beats me to a record because we're almost the same age. He's about a month younger than I am. Sometimes he beats me to a record because I may be injured when we enter a new age category. And then I'll say, you're just borrowing this record, right, Ralph?
That's great. Yeah, it is. That's brilliant. Thanks for all your time, Jerry. Good luck with getting healthy and enjoying the sport for a lot longer. You made great contributions. You have a great attitude about everything. I did talk to Pete Fitzinger, somebody, and some of these other guys that you've competed with in those 70s races at university and in the HEP and in the Ivy League. So I'm sure they'll be happy to hear from you.
Yeah, Pete's another example of a guy that I couldn't beat just because of his kick. I'd be out there setting as hard a pace as I could, and he'd just be sitting on me and then just blow by me at the end. He's got that wicked kick that you guys are all familiar with.
Let's get another couple stories from the 70s and 80s. What other interesting things just haven't come up in our chat today?
The 1984 Japanese Olympic trials that I ran in.
Yeah, how did you end up in that?
In 1984, I was getting into decent shape, and I thought, okay, I want to really give Olympic trials a good shot here. I was training well with my Toronto Olympic Club teammates at the time. I requested a leave of absence from work because I thought it'd really be nice if I could just train full time for a few months. And they were happy to give me a leave of absence, but they weren't going to pay me. So I couldn't really afford to take too much time off. But I took a couple of months off around April, May timeframe. My fiance at the time was studying in Japan near the base of Mount Fuji. She said, why don't you come over here and visit for a while since you've got some time off work? And I said, yeah, okay, but I'm in a heavy training cycle right now, and I need to get into some races now. We're getting into the outdoor track season. I contacted the Canadian Track and Field Association. I said, look, I'm going to Japan for 2 weeks. Can you set me up for a race? And the CTFA checked into it. They got back to me and said, yeah, we got you into the Spanichi Invitational in Tokyo, which is also the Japanese Olympic trials. And they had set up this 10,000 meter race, and they invited a bunch of Africans, Yuma Ikanga from Tanzania, a couple of Kenyans, and a couple of Americans, Ron Cornell, and then me, along with the best Japanese runners. That was a great opportunity. Or a New Zealander as well, John Bowden. I arrived a week before the race. The Japanese are just wonderful in terms of hospitality for lead athletes for track races and road races. They put me up in a hotel for a week, gave me $100 a day meal money, just treated me like royalty, drove me to the track for workouts and stuff like that. The day of the race, the stands are full, about 35,000 people. They had an opening ceremony with all the athletes and introduced us. It was a whole wonderful experience. Even before that, my fiance wanted to travel all over and do the touristy thing. And I said, I think I better concentrate on the race right now because they're treating me really well here. I'm in great shape. I think I can get a good race here. It was a great experience. I ran my lifetime personal best there, 29:08 on the track. So I didn't embarrass myself. Yuma Ikanga, the Tanzanian, he was treated like a rock star. All these teenage girls were throwing their autograph books at him. Yuma Ikanga, sign please.
That's great.
It was nice to be in a sport where all the fans were just crazy about it. That was a great experience. We finally went off and did some touristy things around the countryside in Japan, but my wife also found me a 15-kilometer road race out in the sticks somewhere. And I won that in my training shoes, just used it as a training run. They had this beauty queen with a sash presenting this huge trophy to me. So that was an interesting experience. I really enjoyed it.
That's brilliant.
One more quick story, I think it's an interesting one. In the summer before my senior year at Princeton, I wanted to go all out and come back to campus and be really fit, obviously, and make it to the NCAA and all that. A couple of friends of mine, the Vanderkratz brothers, Ron had been at Princeton and Dennis was at Notre Dame on a track scholarship. 3 of us decided to drive out to Boulder, Colorado and do altitude training for 5 weeks. No preparation whatsoever. We didn't have a place to stay. 3 of us hopped into a Volkswagen Beetle and drove 32 hours straight to Boulder. We knew nothing about Boulder except that Frank Shorter had a store on Pearl Street in the Pearl Street Mall. So first thing we do after driving 32 hours straight, taking turns sleeping in the back seat, we pull into Pearl Street Mall, find Frank Shorter's store, and we walk in. Frank Shorter, he's there to greet us. We explained to him we're 3 Canadian runners. We just came for some altitude training, and Frank said, "Oh, great, fantastic. You'll love training here. And do you have a place to stay?" And we said, "No, we don't have a place to stay yet." So Frank gets on the phone, starts calling his friends up to see if they have any recommendations for places to stay. Eventually, we ended up staying in a college dorm for 5 weeks, and it was the best training I've ever had. I jumped right into 100 miles a week right away, up at altitude. Mary Decker was working the cash register the day we walked into the store. Quacks was fitting shoes onto customers. So a great environment. Quacks left a few weeks later for Europe and broke the world record in the 5,000 meters that summer. It was the summer of 77. I did an interval workout with Mary Decker. Frank said, "Mary," I think she was 19 at the time. "Yeah, she's going to be a big star. You just watch her. And she's looking for someone to do some repeat 600s. So I went and did an interval workout with Mary Decker. So just a great environment and a great 5 weeks. I would do that again in a heartbeat.
Yeah, I've talked to several people who were out there. I interviewed Mary's coach at Colorado, Rich Castro.
Yeah.
Everybody either was in Boston and Eugene or in Boulder at some point.
Yeah.
That's great. Who else was out there then?
Steve Floto and Charlie Vigil were the 2 guys that I trained with the most when I was out there.
Oh.
I went out for a long run with Frank Shorter. That was interesting. Every Sunday, the whole running community would gather in front of Frank's house. Then Frank would open the front door and there'd be like 20, 30 people there, and we're all going out for a long run. That was fun, just joining him. And it was a long run. Some people went shorter, some people went the whole distance with Frank. So that was interesting. But mostly it was Steve Floto and Charlie Vigil.
That's Coach Vigil's son, the Adams State coach, Joe Vigil's son. Is that? It's got to be.
I don't know. I don't think so, because Charlie would be our age by now as well. He'd be in his late 60s, I would think.
Yeah, but it may have been because Joe Vigil was the coach at Adams State. Yeah, the Sunday morning runs, were there women joining on those when you went?
I don't remember all the details of who was there, but I'm pretty sure there were some women. Yeah.
Yeah. I think Lorraine Moeller might have been on those.
It started out at a pretty leisurely pace and then gradually picked up as we got more and more into it. We started out in a large group and then gradually winnowed it down to a smaller group.
Yeah, very cool. Thank you very much for all your time, Jerry.
You're welcome.
Ciao. Bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed another episode of Running in the 70s. Voices, stories, and memories of athletes who were running in the 70s. Until next time, wherever you are, keep looking forward and don't forget to look back.